Today, Sabine is a free woman, but for a while it appeared her headline-making criticism of the Vatican would land her in an Italian prison.
When I gave this speech in the square, I attacked many powers in this country, but the church was one of them, and the church was furious for what I said.
That's because Sabina's speech involves some blasphemous commentary, which we'll translate for you later on. But why would the Vatican make such a point of going after a satirist?
What they wanted to show is something, like I said, couldn't be unpunished.
But why? Isn't Italy a democratic republic, you know, a free country?
It's not a free country, actually, at all. Right now, there is no freedom of expression, but we will take it back, and I like the fight.
And we followed Sabina into her next battle, a one-woman show that very night before a sold-out crowd. Here, she'll bravely revisit her controversial remarks that got her into trouble before. But Sabina is not the only one the Vatican would like to silence.
I'm Jewel Castex, survivor of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. The #1 goal of every bishop, and a part of the vows that they take when they become bishop, is to protect the church from scandal. And protecting the church from scandal means that documents, witnesses, and victims are kept quiet and shuffled away.
Castix is a regional director for SNAP, a survivors network for people who've been abused by priests. She's still angry that her abuser has never been brought to justice.
He was protected by the exact same system that protects all of these priests, which includes orders directly from the Vatican, which require that every diocese have secret personnel files that no one gets a hold of.
Those files are kept on every priest ever accused of sex abuse against a child. They're kept confidential, not to protect the victim, to protect the priest. Yeah, fuck!
The greatest hypocrisy in the church today is that child protection is not the most important thing. Patrick J. Wall, senior consultant, law firm of Manley and Stewart.
Wall is a former priest who now works for a law firm that prosecutes sex abuse cases involving the church. His firm's been swamped since the bombshell discovery of a secret Vatican document in 2003. It's called the crime of enticement, which they discreetly write in Latin.
Crimen Solicitationis is an interesting document published in 1962 and is an order to all archbishops, bishops, cardinals, and heads of religious orders on how to exactly deal with an accusation of childhood sexual abuse by a cleric.
So, how did this confidential document come to light? Did Jesus return and expose the Vatican's little secret?
There was a priest on the west coast here of California who was being accused of sexual abuse of a minor. And in a way to try to get back at the church, he got one of his buddies who was in the congregation in Rome to give him a copy of the document. And then he gave it to a lawyer, and from there it took off.
Why all the excitement? Because the document contains actual proof of an organized Vatican cover-up. Specifically, this little McNugget. Anyone involved in a sex abuse investigation, the accuser and the accused, are to be restrained by a perpetual silence in all matters and with all persons under the penalty of excommunication. That's Vatican for shut your fucking mouth or go to hell.
The only way to really go after the Vatican is through the civil lawsuit system. You touch their money and you will get their attention. All of a sudden now, we have an opening that never existed in history. Through the courts, we now have the ability to sue the Holy See.
This direct legal threat has led to the church offering half-hearted mea culpas. During a trip to the U.S. in 2008, Pope Benedict said this.
I acknowledge the pain which the church in America has experienced as a result of the sexual abuse of minors.
So the Pope says our church feels bad because children got abused. Not, here's what I'm doing to stop my employees from raping your kids. But in Joelle's mind, the whole apology thing was just a big PR stunt.
It was just a lame effort, I think, to get the media off of his back. There were no answers to the tough questions. There were no answers to why priests who perpetrate are still being put in our schools. There's nothing to protect kids.
Why did the Pope's apology smell like bullshit? Because he himself ordered the cover-up. That's right. Before he became Pope, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger served as prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, during which time he issued a confidential order to every bishop that all sex abuse investigations were to be kept top secret for up to 10 years after the victim reached adulthood, upon penalty of excommunication. You heard right. 10 years after the victim reached fucking adulthood. You're probably wondering, gee, if the Pope did that, why isn't he under some sort of investigation? The answer? In 2005, the Pope was granted immunity from liability in any sex abuse cover-ups in the U.S. by President George W. Bush. But perhaps nothing has provoked more outrage in the international community than the Vatican's unwavering condemnation of condoms, even in the face of overpopulation and AIDS.
The idea that the Vatican stands in the way of the protection that people need is morally and ethically just profoundly wrong.
My name is John O'Brien, and I'm the president of Catholics for Choice.
O'Brien's organization represents the millions of Catholics who disagree with Casti Connubii, the Vatican's rule book on contraception.
Casti Connubii was introduced, it's an encyclical from the bishops in the 1930s. What it basically did was it said you couldn't use diaphragms and condoms because that's what they basically had available at that time.
Those forms of contraception directly violated the Vatican's rule that every sex act must potentially lead to the transmission of life. But then came Vatican II, where the Mass went from Latin to English, but the fucking with no contraceptives stayed the same. Casti Connubii, and so we meet again. The circle is now complete. I was but the learner, and now I am the master. Your powers are weak, Casti Connubii. I cannot be your father, Luke.
They thought that if they said, you know, we've changed our minds, we got this wrong, we're going to allow contraception, they thought that Catholics would say, well, we want to change everything and anything about the church.
They don't really trust the people. That's one of the problems. I'm Robert Blair Kaiser, member of the Vatican Press Corps since 1962. They don't give the average Catholic a lot of credit for having any kind of common sense at all, or even a sense of morality.
And yet trust themselves to make the rules when it comes to issues related to sex, despite the fact they vowed to never have it.
There's a bit of a problem if you're celibate and you don't live a married life, making the decisions for other people who are not celibate and do live a married life about what they can and cannot do. I'm sure the bishops do think that natural family planning and the rhythm method is a great method to use because they've not experienced using it.
Yet those methods are the only ones officially sanctioned by Catholic charities working in Latin America and Africa, where every year thousands of women who've been denied access to condoms die from AIDS and while giving birth. But as always, the Vatican would rather force-feed lethal dogma than help people live.
The bishops regard the widespread and indiscriminate promotion of condoms as an immoral and misguided weapon in our battle against HIV/AIDS.
The Vatican says that a man who has AIDS cannot use a condom, even to save the life of his wife. That's crazy. It's against the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, to not use a condom.
All that suffering because of its own sick rules, and yet the Vatican says it's pro-life.
There's no doubt in my mind that the Vatican's policy on sex, contraception, has failed. Hanging on to some sort of, ego trip about, the fact that we don't want to say that we got it wrong means that many people in the world suffer and die.